Welcome to a new season of the U&AI podcast. We are meeting in a very similar format. We'll speak about real-life AI use cases with real ROAI in the enterprise environment. We will talk about agents that people still dream of. But we will not just have executives from big companies, but also some experts who have a different perspective on working with AI, developing AI, and bringing this to the workplace. And I would say today's guest is one of those experts. He's an entrepreneur, but he's also a researcher. And he did his PhD on AI from an organizational and a management perspective. Maximilian Köhler studied industrial engineering in Munich and Aachen, but also spent some time abroad in Hong Kong, Tel Aviv, San Francisco. And while he did not initially focus so much on the technical perspective, he did a lot of research on how AI changes decision-making and productivity and managerial structures in enterprise. So obviously very interesting for our community. And to complete this introduction, he also started his own AI company called Optivisor, which is a platform for AI-driven supply chain planning and forecasting. And I hope I did a good job introducing you. Welcome, Maxi.
Perfectly, yeah. Thank you so much.
Here. Did I forget anything?
No, thank you. It's perfect. Thank you for the invitation.
All right. Then I'd like to jump right into it. Right now, when you go to some of these big conferences, also some management offsites, right? Quotes I hear a lot is AI is basically smashing the traditional management role. Do we even need managers anymore, right? That's like the more extreme statements.
Mm-hmm.
And the term that your scientific work has brought to me initially was the term of algorithmic management. So maybe we can look into that and start by defining, like, how would you define algorithmic management? Where does this come from?
Mm-hmm. Maybe to look at the term or the definition of algorithmic management, we can actually go back where it all started. So if you look at algorithmic management, there are evolutionary stages. If you look, for example, at the early 20th century, it all started, I would say, like with management or scientific management, Taylorism. So there was like this engineer, Frederick Taylor, who started really looking at work in a scientific manner. So instead of like craftsmanship, where somebody would design a product and then also execute the work to really create the product, he would separate actually the brain work, so the planning process, from the execution of building the product, and so separated in a manager and a worker. And of course, decompose also bigger tasks into specific subtasks. And this was like the first step actually towards a system where we had like managers and workers, and not like one person doing everything by its own. And then in the mid 20th century, we had operations research coming up. So we had mathematicians working with optimization models. So they're trying to solve complex problems with math and put everything in this mathematician model. For example, if a salesperson wanted to reach as much, let's say, potential customers as possible in one given day, the optimization model would find the most efficient route actually to reach as much potential customers as possible in that given day. So this is where like also mathematician became part of that because of management or managing people. And then in the early 21st century, we had like computer systems, the internet coming up, and then organizations using enterprise resource systems such as SAP to store and generate all the data and have it all stored in one system. And this data could be then used to track the performance of worker, see also the improvements, and was also the basis for the current stage we are in. So AI-driven algorithmic management, where we really use AI to execute also management functions right now. And this is, of course, only possible because we have big IT systems that store the data, generate the data, and make it possible for AI to execute management functions today.
I really like sort of like this introduction to algorithmic management, because I think it hints at least at two important things. On the one hand, it reminds us that the way we think about management particularly in larger organization, it's not per se natural or like how humans, when they start coming together, start a company, run a project, would think of management, or of getting things done. But this is really a technology in itself that has been evolving with certain theories, certain models that today in a big organization are quite natural, but very much so now with the new technologies that we have at hand. We I think should take a step back, right, and think about, okay, what does this mean now if we have artificial intelligence, if we have algorithms that can do completely new things? Does it really make sense to just pursue management the way we always have done that? And I think the second really important thing that oftentimes gets underestimated right now, you see a lot of big companies recognizing, okay, we invested a lot into AI and there is a big fear of missing out, but we don't see the return on invest yet. And I think the root causes to a large extent are in the previous layer or evolution stage that you described, right? It's in the data layer. So if your enterprise resource planning, that's just one small aspect, but if the data and if the resources are not available in a way that AI managers, algorithmic managers can work with it, then it won't work. But yeah, so I think that's a helpful introduction to the topic. So to make this more tangible, how could we maybe like walk through some examples? How could we describe what algorithmic management is in real life? So I understood there's this original idea of Taylorism, that this evolved. It became more and more a question of like also how do we optimize management work or the management tasks, and then then there came like the digital era with ERPs and like providing a whole different level of databases. Maybe we can find some examples like what algorithm management is to make it a bit less abstract.
Sure. So when we wrote the paper back then, there were a lot of like, let's say, individual management functions out there, more like a fragmented picture of like what is management. And this is also was the reason back then why we actually started working on a paper to define like a framework that more or less includes like all the basic management functions. So we have like five overall management functions that every manager needs to execute. And of course, then you can go more into detail, but those are the basic functions. So first of all, the task division and allocation. This is really about a manager defining an objective, like an overall task. And then of course, this task needs to be divided, and then each subtask needs to be allocated to a worker, to an employee. And mostly like based on the experience or the knowledge of the employee, you want to have like a task that fits like to the employee you would allocate the task to. A very, I would say, common example that exists also for a few years now and is also an app that all of us are using is, for example, Uber. Uber has a dispatch algorithm, meaning the system has a specific task. The task is to pick up, for example, a driver and then bring it to a certain location. And the algorithm does it based on different variables. So includes, for example, the geographic proximity between passenger and driver. It looks at the estimated pickup time. So it forecasts also how long does it take to pick up the passenger. It looks at the driver utilization. Has the driver, for example, picked up somebody before, or is it the first ride for them? Driver rating, and all those different factors are then included to make a decision as a system. And the system then decides, okay, this is the optimal driver now to pick up the passenger and bring it to the certain location. And this is done for many hundred thousands or millions of rides every day or every week all over the world, completely automatically without like any manager sitting there and allocating those tasks. So
it's very much like, if we talk about the algorithmic manager or management in that very tangible story we all are familiar with, I think, then this is the work that once I still remember when you called up the local taxi service, they would do this, right? They would find out, you here, you need to go there. I'm gonna check like who my drivers is available. So I think it's very much, I think from algorithmic management, it's always from, okay, what does a real life, a human manager still does today, and how could this be automated? I have to admit, when I heard this term algorithmic management for the first time, I think I had a different interpretation. I didn't think of it as, okay, this is now algorithms managing or AI agents taking over management, but I understood it as, okay, there's parts of a manager role where you can apply a very algorithmic way of working, right? You have some kind of input. You can apply a relatively like a repetitive recipe and provide some more or less predictable output based on that, right? That was my understanding of structuring and defining certain types of management work. But I think those two interpretations are very close to each other, I guess, right? So everywhere where human managers pursue that kind of management, it's a good starting point, or it's an easier game for AI to actually take over and become the algorithmic manager, right?
Exactly. The more structured a task is, the more codifiable as well, the easier it is right now also for AI to execute a task and automate it.
Yeah. And the context data, right? And like this makes those huge flywheels of organizations or companies and business models like Uber so successful. The more often you do that, the more guests you have, the more drivers you have, the more data and the more reliable your model becomes. And I think that's also a reason why in big organizations that we work with, the bigger your organization, the faster you drive adoption, the better you can train your model and have better algorithmic managers than all the other companies, which might be there from like a maturity point of view, but also might not have the size. So I think that we don't have time to go into this today, but this is also, I think, one reason why AI, I think, will divide the field a lot in terms of companies who can benefit and others that fall behind. So let's move on into like the next category. And by the way, for our listeners, so there's this really nice overview in some of Maximilian's work where those 5 dimensions are defined. We're gonna put this into the show notes, so you can dive deeper if you're interested. But let's move on from task division, allocation, and let's just walk through a couple of more examples maybe for our audience.
Maybe I can talk also about each function and give some examples.
Yeah.
So the next one would be direction. If you think, for example, about a manager, you cannot just allocate the task to an employee, but you also sit down and explain like what is the specific requirement of the task, like also give recommendations, restrict also the choices, for example, to execute that task. So you need to give some guidelines. This is actually direction. So you need to put them really like into a specific direction, and this is what direction is about. Then next one, coordination. Coordination is about enabling the flow in a team. So enabling the information flow in a team. If you have like several team members, you want them to communicate with each other. You want like this information flow to happen. And at the end, of course, you need also to integrate all the contributions from your individual employees, from your team members, so it makes sense actually, because otherwise it's just chaos. And this is like also one of the tasks of a manager is to coordinate a team. Then if we look at motivation, also quite important function of a manager. This is really about also monitoring the effort and performance of employees to see, for example, if the provided incentives and rewards for that work also make sense. Like you need to think about like what is the reward, what is the incentive you can provide, so they become more productive, are happy with their job, satisfied, and so on. And there's, I would say, like one very interesting example from IBM, because IBM, and I heard from this example the first time, I think already like 6 years ago. So I think right now the system is even more advanced and probably exists also in other companies, but they were like one of the first where I saw like this kind of system evolving. And what they did is they had like they had a big issue with people quitting their jobs out of a sudden. I mean, that happens to many managers that out of a sudden, like your employees just quit and leave the job. And this cost them a lot of money. So what they were thinking about is like, what are the best predictors of people quitting their jobs? And therefore they developed an AI system. And this AI system included like many different variables. So they looked, for example, at the last promotion of the employee. They looked at the commute time, because the commute time was also a big predictor of people quitting their jobs. How much overtime they have worked over the past weeks and past months, and also their compensation compared to their peers, because people talk and they probably know like what their colleagues are earning. And based on those variables, they were able to predict actually by 95% accuracy when employee would quit their job and leave the company. And the system would then inform the manager in advance, even before like the employee would notice that they want to quit the job, and inform the manager that he has to take certain action, for example, and increase the salary, promote the employee, or just try and talk to them to understand like what are the issues, like can we make them happier, maybe move to a different department and so on. And they could decrease actually the churn rate by employees, so to speak, tremendously. And according to IBM, they saved 300 million euros or dollars by using this system actually. So I think this is also an incredible example that a management system can not only be like beneficial for the employer, but also for the employee. Because I mean, as an employee, you also want to have a manager that actually notice when you're not happy with your job and probably want to quit for some reasons.
Yeah. Do you remember in this use case how transparent this was to employees? Because we're gonna talk about this in a moment. Like what are the concerns, or how can these kind of systems be misused, or what are also like maybe reasonable fears, right? And I think there's probably among employees mixed feelings at least about this. And what we always find at WorkPath, and what we really focus on, is like making this transparent, making it very easy to understand and to control. How does this actually work? So nobody feels like I'm being in a machine, or I am being manipulated.
I cannot say like how transparent IBM made that to the employee at the end. But I mean, what they did is they had like this, they had the data about the employees, and they were using them, using the data, and were able to identify them as good predictors for them quitting the job. So I mean,
it totally makes sense. And I think in this particular example, if you're doing it right, I don't see why, like, also the employee would not, like, best case, it's a win-win. It's beneficial for everyone involved. But I think it has to do a lot with like, how do you communicate? How do you embed this? How transparent is what happens in the back there? Yeah. What I think the fifth dimension in your framework here is learning, or supporting the learning, providing feedback. Maybe you have one or two examples on this as well, right? Because I think when we talk with leaders about algorithmic management, particularly on this left side of the spectrum of like motivation, learning, most people would say like that's more leadership than management. Those are more like soft factors where the human to human connection matters a lot. And I think there's more nuance. So let's maybe bring in one or two more examples on that side of your model here.
Supporting learning, of course, there are some soft skills involved, but it can be also quite technical skill by the manager. So supporting learning in our framework is about providing feedback. So you sit down with your employee, providing feedback on their work based on, of course, the task specification and everything, and also create learning opportunities. You want your employees to learn while doing their job, so they become better, increase their productivity, become happier in doing their job, and so on. And you could also later use them or deploy them for different tasks if they learn. And this was also a function that was, I would say, a few years ago, difficult for AI to do. But I found actually also quite interesting examples on that today. If you look at 2026 or 2025, there are already like very interesting software companies out there that try to also work on software solutions that provide feedback, that create learning opportunities for employees. And one example is from a software company from the US. There was like a guy, I think was a researcher from MIT. He worked on a software that's an AI software that could also detect like the feeling of somebody when listening to their voice, like when listening to what they were talking about. And he had then this idea to also create a software that could be used for different purposes. For example, they deployed it in a customer service center, because what does a supervisor or manager need to do when talking to the customer service employees? They were sitting next to them, listening to the conversations they had with the clients, and then providing feedback. What could they do better? Show more empathy, be maybe more precise on this and that, and or talk more slowly and all that things. And of course, this is something that is not really scalable or takes a lot of time. And what they were doing, they were just using the AI software. The AI software would listen then to the tone of the customer service employee, and of course also of the client they were talking to. They were listening to the speed of voice and could detect actually if, for example, the employee should be more empathetic, should lower the voice, should slow down in talking, or maybe talk also to very specific, talk more about more specific topics, for example. And this is something, like this was a system that is still a system that provides also like real-time feedback based on the actions of the employee. And this is something that a manager would have done also before, maybe after the call. And this is something that could now be done in real time for thousands or many thousands of different employees at the same time. So this is also something that could be done today. And this is, I think, something we thought about a few years back that it's quite difficult to do, but now it's something very realistic.
Yeah, I keep experiencing exactly that. So I think most people are hugely underestimating what is possible, also in terms of understanding sentiment, understanding like how someone feels, behaves, etc. I think here in larger parts of Europe, we're seeing like companies in stopping at an earlier point, and there's always this these concerns or these feelings. Okay, machines directing, coordinating, motivating humans, like I think it's also a cultural aspect, right? So we definitely need to talk more about this, because what we can be sure of is that there's lots of companies out there who drive this to the max, and who are just, in terms of productivity and many competitive aspects that matter, are outperforming others. So it's not just, I think that goes back to what we said in the beginning, not just a technological revolution that's happening right now, but it also requires a certain kind of foundation in terms of cultural development and a public debate probably, but also other aspects with regards to governance, data governance, etc. What are the most common challenges, pushbacks that you've come across when you think about, or when you researched about algorithmic management? Why companies maybe struggle to adopt it?
Of course, if you hear like the first time about algorithmic management, it sounds of course like kind of concerning, but I have to say it's also still up to us, like how to design and concipate like those systems. So of course, if you think about surveillance and privacy and autonomy, this is something that definitely needs to be included in the design of those systems. So if you think about designing such an algorithmic management system, this should align with the ethical standards of the organization, with the regulations, and everything else. So this is, and if you think, for example, about surveillance and privacy, everybody of us knows also like how managers can be also very controlling. I mean, there's this typical example of like a micromanager or control freak. And of course, the same could happen like if you design a system in this way. But of course, there are also good managers that leave enough autonomy, support the employees in becoming a better and more productive worker, probably.
That's by the way
Yeah.
maybe a counterintuitive, but a good perspective. It's easier to detect bad algorithmic management patterns or behavior than if a human manager does
Absolutely,
that,
yeah.
right? Like that happens at the office, in calls, like all the toxic kind of behavior you could have there. But yeah, algorithmic management behavior and the design of it is very transparent, can be controlled, can go through like ethic boards, etc. So I think that's actually a really good point. Yeah.
Exactly. Surveillance and privacy, super important. And as you said, also something that can be better controlled and steered by the organization through such systems. And then also what you touched on is like trust, right? You need to have trust in those systems because you need to also have trust in your manager. If your manager takes a decision, you want to have the trust that this decision is the right decision and that it makes sense. Like that if you follow this direction, it should be the right direction. The same feeling you should have like with the system, right? So the system should provide some explainability, transparency, and therefore you as an employee can also better trust the system, that the system takes the right decision for the future. And then also a point that is maybe also something concerning from the perspective of an employer is manipulation. Because if you think, for example, there are some examples. If you think about Upwork, this freelancer platform, where you can hire, for example, as a company, a freelancer, they were using also some kind of algorithmic management systems to rate also freelancer, so based on their work. And there are quite some studies actually how those freelancers also manipulated the system. So they were more like optimizing the observable metric rather than actually the outcome, like the performance outcome that was actually intended to be measured. And such things can also happen, of course, that you have like employees who are manipulating your management system and more or less like make the best out of it for them. So something that is also concerning, of course, for organizations, and they should think about, not only from the employee's perspective,
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, could go into a couple of directions from here, but I think what's probably most pressing for most organizations is, so what does this mean for how we think about roles and in particular the role of the manager, right? I have a very positive view on this because I think if you look into the average European corporate, it's expected a lot from managers, right? It's a lot of reporting, it's a lot of bureaucracy, it's a lot of like still like very operative tasks. It's at the same time people leadership. It's like so many different things, and you can easily show how the last decades this has gotten more and more. So I think my very positive view on this is that algorithmic management can free up managers to focus more on high impact tasks and parts of their role where they can really make a difference, and where humans will for much longer time will be really the key aspect, the differentiator. But I think it's clear that the role of management is about to change, and maybe we can, towards the second part of our conversation, look at this. How does, from your perspective, from all the research you did, the role of the manager have to change, and what do managers have to do? Like what do they have to learn? Are there any new skills needed? How do you think about this transition?
Mm-hmm. So probably there will be a big change also for managers, of course, as you said. And I think there are two aspects. I think those two aspects are also quite interesting. The first aspect is really about that the manager is less executing management functions themselves, but need to design and configure a system that executes those management functions now. And therefore they need to think really about like the design of such complex systems, like what are the incentive and rewards for my employees, what are the ethical standards, what are the regulations I want to include, are there specific aspects I want to include personally into the management system. So this would be the more technical part, I would say, and the more technical skills probably a manager need to acquire for the future. And then you have like the complete opposite, because things that AI cannot do is like or at least right now, is show empathy to employees, talk to them, creating also an organizational culture, for example, like Steve Jobs did. Those are things that an AI probably will not do like in the next decades and won't be able to do. So you will also have a lot of soft skills that will become more important for managers. And if they are good at this, they can also probably become a better manager than overall, or have like an organization with a good technical management system and a good manager that has like really good soft skills, probably.
Yeah, such an interesting time. And at the same time, I think a couple of things that have been said for a very long time, how the role of management has to change, they just become more pressing now, right? That's something we experience working with all of those companies. It's like what you just said, managers have to work more on the system than in the system, right? I think that has been true for a very long time. So just trying to squeeze out the results out of your team, your department, your business unit. I think it has always made sense for a leader to also understand organizational sociology or organizational theory, like how does all of this work? How do my decisions on organizational structures influence collaboration? And I feel like this kind of mindset to work much more on the system than in the system, and the skills, the knowledge behind is becoming way more relevant, because the challenges become just also way more complex. You now not just have human workers, but you also have AI workers who, I think this is the year where AI agents turn from talkers to doers and really take over more and more work and become really meaningful in execution. Factor, yeah. And then you suddenly have a mixed team across, or an interdisciplinary team of agents and humans. Like all of this, I think, yeah, just adds complexity. So working more on the system is, I am very sure, a management task that will be one of the most relevant ones in the next decades ahead. Very more like an architect of how those things play together now. And at the same time, we also very much believe in everyone will be a manager. So probably if you are in an individual contributor role right now, there's still people who think they might get around AI or something like that. That's just the last 3 years, looking into many of these leading enterprises on AI, right? We had some on the podcast, Siemens Energy, just as one example, SAP, they do a lot. And you can see that everyone in every role will have a couple of AI agents work for them. So I think traditional managers will also have to support their ICs to become managers of agents. So that's just a lot going on. And I understand those that feel a bit overwhelmed right now. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe we come to the final question that we, in the first season, asked everyone, and we want to keep asking this also in this one. So if you imagine your dream agents, the perfect assistant, the perfect coworker as an AI agent, what would it do for you? How would you set it up? I assume, and not just in your company, but maybe also in some aspects of how you organize yourself. You already work with AI, but what would be your dream agent?
Yeah, not an easy question, but I thought a little bit about it. And I mean, most of the time I invest in our company is, of course, sales, because I'm responsible also for sales at Optimizer. And if you sell an AI supply chain software to companies, this is, of course, like not a super simple sales process. So we need to talk to a lot of potential clients. And then probably you have like 30, max like 45 minutes to really understand the requirements perfectly. And then match actually those requirements to the functionalities of your software and try to explain within this short time like how your software can solve all those problems. And if it cannot solve the problems right now, like how you can come up with, I don't know, like new functions that could solve those problems. And from my perspective, this requires like a lot of expertise and knowledge and just like many conversations with people from different industries also. And of course, this is like hard to scale, as it is mostly like with sales in some sectors, because you need to hire good people that are experienced, and of course they need also to learn over the time to be able to convince the potential client that the software also meets the requirements. And if you would have, for example, an AI agent that could talk to the customer, to the potential customer, perfectly understand the requirements, and then also can perfectly explain how the software currently can meet those requirements, and also come up with suggestions how to further improve the software, for example, based on many thousands of customers the AI system talk to make the software better. I mean, this would be, of course, like the perfect system to work with, because then you could work with, thousands of different companies at the same time, talk to them, extract the requirements, and make the software even better. So in terms of product development, this would be also like speed up everything.
100%. Yeah. But while you're speaking, some of our listeners know the work path agent canvas. I'm trying to structure this in like the fields we have there: input, output, outcome, impact. So if I'm just trying to recap what you said, this agent in terms of input would try to gather information about a company, their process, how they run their procurement, their forecasting right now. Ask follow-up questions, so everything they need to understand the pain, really. And then output for, in this case, the prospect, the customer, would be showing that you have a solution, showing like which modules, which features, how your technology could help.
Exactly.
I guess the outcome would, as you just said, I mean, saving a lot of time on both ends, at least human time, and a business impact obviously would be more business relationships, more sales. Just as a reminder for everyone, we're gonna put the agent canvas also into the show notes. And yeah, I really like that. I mean, it's a very, I think, entrepreneurial use case that resonates with me. We're also driving some experiments around this, and I think if you take it one step further, right, we're not so far away from like just agents talking to agents on both sides, basically. So bigger companies at least will have their own procurement agent who know exactly like that's the RFQ document, basically what we're looking for, and they will talk to the sales agent on the other hand. At least
they could perfectly match, actually.
Exactly, matching that, at least pre-filtering and clarifying a lot of the work that right now sometimes still involves, I'd say, 15 to 25 people over 3 to 6 months at least. So
exactly.
Yeah, we are back at algorithmic management and how AI agents will move from talkers to doers. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks you.
Thanks for these great insights into your research work. Again, I think it's an amazing example of how also the scientific perspective can sometimes just help to provide language or provide like a structure, model, how to talk about what's happening right now. I found this really, really helpful. If you are, as listeners, interested to dive a bit deeper, we'll actually have Max join us again next week. This is, I think, March 19th. In this online session, which is going to be live, you have the option to ask questions, right? That's also a great benefit. And we're going to show a couple of more real-life examples that we at WorkPath also see in some of these European and international corporates, some of the companion use cases we've implemented ourselves. But it's all going to be about algorithmic management and how algorithmic managers will really change how organizations will think about management and organization structures, coordination, etc. So if you're listening a bit later, we'll also link, obviously, the recording of this online session to the podcast episode. But I think for today, that's it. And again, Max, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.
See you soon.